Sometimes everything in our lives doesn't always go to plan. There are times of rejoicing and where things are good. There are times of stability when things are okay. But for all of us, there are times when life can be tough and difficult, where there are things that hurt us, things that damage us, situations that we wish we didn't have to go through. And I want to ask us a question. How do we respond? What is our reaction when life is difficult? When life doesn't go as we would like it to go? I know for me, my reaction isn't always a holy and a spiritual one. Very often I'll have a strop, I'll stomp around, I'll be moaning at God. God, why have you let this happen? I'll fly off the handle, I'll say a few things that aren't helpful or spiritual. And I wonder if your reaction is kind of like the same. We get upset, we get frustrated. There are so many questions and things going on. I heard of a story of a lady who lives in Iran. And there were some difficult things that happened to her, and her response to it has really challenged me to think about my life and the way that I respond to difficult situations that I encounter. I want to tell you her story. So she lives in Iran. Iran is a country that persecutes Christians. Just 1% of the population are Christians, but that is growing. There is an underground church. There is a move of God happening where people can't help but tell other people about Jesus. There is a real work going on, but it has to be undercover. It has to be subtle. And this lady is part of it, and so is her family. And one day she's at home with her parents and with her sister, and there's a knock on the door. And in through the door fly the police. They're looking for her sister. They find her. They grab her. They're trying to handcuff her. And this lady is crying out, please, no, don't. Please don't put the cuffs on her. Please don't arrest her. But they ignore her. They cuff her and they take her away. Because she is known to them. She's been known to be telling other people about Jesus. She's been known to be handing out Bibles. And so she's arrested. She's arrested and she's taken away. Well, this Iranian lady gets really, really upset. She falls to the ground weeping. My sister, she's been taken away. She is distraught. She doesn't know what's going to happen to her sister. She doesn't know if she's ever going to see her again. And she is wailing on the floor in tears. Now you can understand that. This is a huge situation that she is facing. And she is overcome with emotion and she is crying. The interesting thing is that her parents aren't on the floor wailing and weeping as well. They gently and tenderly stoop down to her, they hold her hand and they begin to pick her up. And they say, now is the time. We need to worship and pray. And so this lady gingerly gets to her feet, her legs wobbling, the tears streaming down her face. Kind of in disbelief that her parents are suggesting that we need to worship and we need to pray in this moment. But she goes with it. And so they worship and they pray and they lift their eyes up out of their situation and they fix them on Jesus. And something begins to happen in that moment. That their faith is gently rebuilt, that they are strengthened, that they know the presence, the power and the love of God, that they know that they are not alone in this moment. The greatest thing that they could do was to fix their eyes upon God and to seek Him, and through worship and praise to remind themselves of who He is. There is something incredibly powerful that happens when we worship. Whether we worship on our own, whether we worship along to music on a CD, whether we worship in church, whether we worship as part of a small group, or whatever it might be. There is something incredibly powerful that happens in those moments. And for this lady, that was the key. That was the key that turned her mourning into peace and an assurance that God was there in the midst of that situation. A few hours later, the door went again and she herself was arrested. Wow, what a story, what a challenge to us You know, these people are putting their lives on the line to tell others about Jesus and to give Bibles. And yet this lesson is wonderful, that in the midst of her grief and her pain and her fear and every other emotion, she didn't want to worship. That wasn't her natural reaction. But she chose to. And it was in the worship, it was in the fixing her eyes upon Jesus, that everything turned around. Gavin Calver, a Christian leader, reflected on this story, and he said this: sometimes there is a mighty move of God in our circumstances, but other times we have to make a deliberate choice to keep moving forward in faith. We decide that we are not going to be defeated by our situation, and so we choose to worship instead of weep, declare truth instead of lie down in a bed of lies, and wake up to the greatness of God, rather than letting the oppressor pin us to a perspective of darkness. You know, he's right. It's not wrong to cry, but in the midst of our tears, in the midst of our frustration, in the midst of our disappointment, one of the most helpful things that we can do is to bring that to God through worship and through prayer. Because then his truth is revealed to us. Then he is able to meet us and sustain us and help us. Horatio Spafford wrote the hymn, "It is well with my soul." Those words were written not from a place of rejoicing and life is great. Those words were written as his boat sailed over the place that his wife and some of his children had died when their ship went down. It was in that moment that he chose to worship. It was in that moment that he chose to fix his eyes upon God. And God met him in that place. God sustained him and comforted him and helped him. Psalm 30, we read these words: "To you, Lord, I called. To the Lord I cried for mercy. What is gained if I am silenced, if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your faithfulness? Hear, Lord, and be merciful to me. Lord, be my help. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever." I want to encourage us right now maybe to just spend a few moments praising God. Maybe that we're struggling with some difficult things in our lives. I want to encourage you, bring those to God, but also do so in a spirit of worship. Maybe play some worship music. Maybe sing a song that is really meaningful to you. Just spend some time in his presence, refocusing, repositioning, inviting him to meet with us by his Spirit as we worship. Let's lift our eyes up. Let's let him meet with us, sustain us, and help us.